Some movies just arrive at the wrong moment. The late 90s were loud, the blockbusters were louder, and these 9 crime thrillers got lost in the shuffle. They shouldn't have, and whether it was bad timing or bad publicity, they deserved better. George Clooney spent most of the 90s trying to prove he wasn't just the guy from ER. After 1997's Batman and Robin flop, his career was nearly over. But then Out of Sight came along, and Roger Ebert wrote that the good-looking leading man from TV was finally over with. That's what this film did for Clooney, and it did the same thing for director Steven Soderbergh, who at that point described half the industry as off-limits to him, after years in what he called the art house ghetto. The movie is based on an Elmore Leonard novel about a career bank robber who breaks out of prison and shares a car trunk with the federal marshal hunting him.
I go back, I do 30 years, no time off. Can you imagine looking at that?
I don't have to, I don't rob banks.
Played by Jennifer Lopez in one of her best on-screen performances. The two of them spend the rest of the film deciding whether to arrest each other or fall in love. It builds to a hotel bar scene, 2 people who shouldn't be in the same room together and can't keep their hands off each other. And Soderbergh directs the hell out of it, cutting between the conversation and what comes after in a way that feels both inevitable and electric. His ability to weave stories around a deep supporting ensemble would be a staple in his future films. Don Cheadle, Ving Rhames, Steve Zahn, and even a Michael Keaton cameo. It's the film that solidified Clooney as a movie star and handed Soderbergh the keys to Hollywood. Soderbergh followed Out of Sight with 1999's The Limey, a neo-noir showcase for lead actor Terrence Stamp.
You tell him! You tell him I'm coming! Tell him I'm fucking coming!
He plays Wilson, a British career criminal who flies to Los Angeles fresh out of prison to find out who killed his daughter. Peter Fonda plays the record producer he suspects, a man who took the whole 1960s Southern California dream and ran with it straight into the drug trade. On paper, that's a straightforward revenge thriller. What Soderbergh does with it is something else. He fractures the timeline so that dialogue from one scene plays over the visuals of another, and flashbacks to Wilson as a young man is footage borrowed from a 1967 Ken Loach film that Stamp appeared in called Poor Cow.
Freedom is a word I rarely use without thinking.
The same character, 30 years younger, with no CGI and just the passage of time made visible. Roger Ebert wrote that it's really a movie about retirement. Tough guys past their sell-by dates, circling each other in the California sun. Stamp is extraordinary in it, all skull and suppressed fury. Critics loved it, but almost nobody saw it. But it's one of the better films of Stamp's career, and most people couldn't tell you a single thing about it. John Sayles wrote, directed, and edited 1996's Lone Star by himself, which tells you everything about the kind of filmmaker he is. It's a neo-Western murder mystery set in a small Texas border town where a sheriff's badge and skeleton turn up on an old Army firing range. Chris Cooper plays Sam Deeds, the current sheriff and son of a beloved local legend, who slowly realizes the bones might belong to a man his father was suspected of killing decades earlier. Chris Christopherson plays the dead man, a sadistic, corrupt sheriff from the 1950s, and a then little-known Matthew McConaughey plays Sam's father as a young man in the flashbacks. Sayles cast McConaughey specifically because he needed someone with presence.
Not a soul in this county isn't sick to death of your bullshit, Charlie Wade. You made yourself scarce. You could make a lot of people happy.
You little pisshead.
But no star weight yet. What makes the film technically remarkable is how Sayles handles those flashbacks. He refused to use cuts between past and present. Instead, the camera simply pans across the same location, and the timeline shifts within a single shot, so the past and present literally share the same frame. He described it as wanting the transitions to feel like a river flowing. The screenplay was nominated for an Academy Award, a BAFTA, and a Golden Globe. It's one of those movies that rewards a second watch, a brilliant film with an ending that lands completely differently once you know where it's going. After directing 1996's breakout Swingers, director Doug Liman turned down bigger budget studio comedies to make the low-budget movie Go for around $5 million. He also served as his own cinematographer, which meant when producers told him a Las Vegas car chase sequence would have to be cut for budget reasons, he simply dedicated nearly a third of the entire budget to that one scene and found savings everywhere else. That's the kind of director he is, and that stubbornness is all over the finished film. Go is a Christmas Eve crime comedy told in 3 interlocking chapters, following a grocery store clerk who decides to become an impromptu drug dealer to cover her rent, 2 soap opera actors caught up in a police sting, and a chaotic Vegas detour that goes sideways in every possible direction. Sarah Polley leads the first story, and Katie Holmes was cast before Dawson's Creek turned her into a cover star. Timothy Oliphant plays the dealer, a role he showed up to with a temporary neck tattoo of flaming dice that he'd had the makeup department stamp on himself overnight to convince Lyman to keep it. The screenplay was John August's first produced script. He went on to write 5 Tim Burton films, and The Bourne Identity came next for Lyman himself. It's also Melissa McCarthy's film debut, Blink and You'll Miss It. Everyone involved was on the way to somewhere, and Go is the document of that moment. After Swingers made Vince Vaughn a star in 1996, he made some interesting choices. He played Norman Bates in Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot Psycho remake. He starred in Return to Paradise, a heavy drama about a guy deciding whether to go to prison to save his friend's life. And then Clay Pigeons, a Montana-set black comedy where he plays a serial killer dressed up as a charming cowboy drifter named Lester Long, all backslapping warmth and a giggle that makes your skin crawl. Vaughn described Lester as a man who constructed his entire identity from Western movies he'd seen growing up. Not a real cowboy, just someone who decided to become one. It's one of the strangest and most interesting performances of his career. The film follows Clay, played by Joaquin Phoenix, a small-town gas station attendant whose best friend dies and then frames him for murder in the process. Then Lester shows up and attaches himself to Clay like a man-shaped barnacle, and bodies start piling up around both of them. Janine Garofalo plays the FBI agent sent to investigate, smoking weed and radiating contempt for everyone around her. It was director David Dobkin's feature debut, produced by Ridley Scott, and the dynamic between Phoenix's hangdog bewilderment and Vaughn's performed menace is the engine of the entire movie. It got mixed reviews and disappeared fairly quickly, but it deserved better. Pulp Fiction opened in October 1994, and every studio in Hollywood was scrambling to find the next Tarantino. Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead was Miramax's entry, a neo-noir crime film with a Warren Zevon song for a title, snappy criminal slang, and a crew of eccentric lowlifes on a collision course with fate. The script is written by Scott Rosenberg, who went on to write Con Air and punch up half of Jerry Bruckheimer's output for the next decade. But what saves it, and genuinely elevates it, is the cast and performances. Andy Garcia plays Jimmy the Saint, a retired gangster trying to run a legitimate business recording final messages for the dying, who gets pulled back in for one last job that goes spectacularly wrong. Christopher Walken plays the wheelchair-bound crime boss who orders the job. Christopher Lloyd plays one of Jimmy's crew, a man whose body parts are literally falling off. Treat Williams is another crew member who uses corpses at the funeral parlor he works at as punching bags. Steve Buscemi turns up as a near-silent assassin named Mr. Shh. The film grossed only $500,000 theatrically, but the cast alone is worth 3 times that. 1998's A Simple Plan follows 3 men who find a crashed plane in the woods containing $4.5 million in cash, and they make the catastrophically human decision to keep it. Bill Paxton plays the responsible one who convinces himself they can do this cleanly, while Billy Bob Thornton plays his slower, gentler brother. The dynamic between them is the core of the movie. Paxton's quiet unraveling as the reasonable man who keeps making one more reasonable compromise, and Thornton doing something a little more complicated than it first looks. Bridget Fonda plays Paxton's wife and functions essentially as Lady Macbeth in a parka. Sam Raimi directed it, which is not the name you'd expect on this kind of movie. This is the guy who made Evil Dead and Darkman. But he took the job specifically to prove he could work in a lower key, and it's arguably one of his more underrated movies. He asked the Coen brothers for advice on filming in frozen conditions, which is fitting because this movie lives in the same moral landscape as Fargo, just with less dark humor and a little more dread. Billy Bob earned an Oscar nomination while Paxton, who is equally good, didn't, and the movie lost money on a $17 million budget. But considering the talents of everyone involved, it deserved a much bigger audience than the one it got. David Mamet wrote the role of Jimmy Dell in The Spanish Prisoner, specifically for Steve Martin. The reasoning was deliberate. Mamet understood that an audience watching him would spend the whole film waiting for the joke, and that expectation could be weaponized. Cast as a charming, wealthy stranger who befriends a naive corporate engineer at a Caribbean resort, Martin plays it completely straight, all easy warmth and quiet menace in a way only few people can. Campbell Scott plays Joe Ross, the engineer who has invented a valuable process for his company, the nature of which is never revealed, a classic Hitchcock MacGuffin, and who slowly realizes that everyone around him, including people he trusted, may be running a long con at his expense. Mamet wrote and directed it, and one of the more notable things about the film is that there isn't a single obscenity in it. Remarkable for the man who wrote Glengarry Glen Ross, and Mamet was apparently quite proud of earning his first PG rating. The supporting cast includes Ricky Jay, Felicity Huffman, Ben Gazzara, and an early appearance from Clark Gregg. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars and compared it to Hitchcock. It's the kind of film that rewards a second watch almost more than a first, once you know who everybody actually is. David Lynch described Lost Highway not as a story, but as a psychogenic fugue, a mental break made visible on screen. That's as useful a piece of guidance as you're going to get, and probably more honest than most directors would be about their own movie. It follows a jazz musician played by Bill Pullman, who begins receiving anonymous VHS tapes on his doorstep, showing footage of the inside of his own home. He gets convicted of his wife's murder, and then inexplicably transforms in his prison cell into an entirely different person, played by a different actor. Patricia Arquette plays 2 separate women across both halves of the film. It's weird, it's Lynch, and it's exactly what you'd expect. Lynch kept his cast deliberately in the dark about what kind of movie they were making, because the uncertainty created an atmosphere he wanted on screen. Robert Blake plays a character called the Mystery Man, pale, no eyebrows, appearing and disappearing without explanation, and the performance is one of the most genuinely disturbing things in any Lynch film, which is saying something. It was Blake's final film role before his real life became its own crime story. Richard Pryor also appears in a small role, one of his last before his death. Upon release, the film received mixed reviews. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert both gave it 2 thumbs down, which Lynch later described as 2 more great reasons to see it.